G'day! In this lesson, we will build a domain layer for authors. In the previous lesson, when we built the server side for books, we've used the ABP infrastructure to easily build some services. We used the CRUD app service base class instead of manually developing an application service for standard create, read, update, and delete operations. We also used generic repositories to completely automate the database layer. For the authors database layer, we will do some of the things manually to show you how you can do it in case you need to. We will implement some domain-driven design best practices. The development will be done layer by layer to concentrate on the individual layer one at a time. In a real project, you will develop your application feature by feature as done in the previous lessons when we were creating the book management features. In this way, we will experience both approaches. Let's create an authors folder in the domain project and add an authors class and replace its contents with the following code. The author entity is inherited from the fully audited aggregate root of type GUID with all its auditing properties. This makes the records in the database for authors soft delete, which means that when you actually delete a record, it doesn't actually delete it from the database, but it's just marked as deleted. Notice that the name property is set to private. This restricts to set this property from outside this class. There are two ways of setting the name in both cases. We validate the name in the constructor while creating a new author, or we use the change name method to update the name later. The constructor and the change name methods are internal so that these methods can only be called in the domain layer using the authors manager that we will be implementing later in this lesson. The ABP framework has a utility class called check to help check the method arguments. It is used in the setName method to throw an argument exception on an invalid case. The author constants is a simple class that is located under the authors folder of the domain.shared project. Let's create the class and replace its contents with the following code. We will reuse this class when we create the DTOs for the authors entity. The author entity we just created has the authors constructor and the change name method, which are both internal so that we can use them in the domain layer. Let's create an author manager class in the authors folder of the domain project and replace its contents with the following code. You'll notice that the author manager calls the author constructor and the change name method. The author manager forces us to create an author and change the author's name in a controlled way. The application layer will be introduced later and we will use these methods so that we don't have to call on the author entity directly, as these methods and properties will not be accessible from the application layer. Do not introduce domain service methods unless they are really needed and perform some core business rules. For this case, we needed this service to be able to force unique name constraint on authors. Both methods check if there is already an author with the given name and throw a special business exception. Let's create an author already exists exception class defined in the domain project in the authors folder, and we'll replace its contents with the following code. A business exception is a special exception type. It is a good practice to throw domain-related exceptions when needed, because these exceptions will be automatically handled by the ABP framework. In addition, these exceptions can easily be localized using the withData method. This method can also be used to provide additional data to the exception object that can be used on the localization message or for some other purpose. Let's open the bookstore domain error codes in the domain.shared project and change its contents with the following code. This is a unique string which represents the error code thrown by the application and can be handled by the client application. They are useful for users as they can be localized. Let's open the localization /bookstore/en.json inside the domain.shared project and add the following English translation keys. Now, whenever we throw an author already exists exception, the end user will see this message on the UI. The author manager injects the iAuthor repository so that we can perform database operations. Let's create this new interface in the authors folder of the acme.bookstore.domain project and replace its contents with the following code. The iAuthor repository extends the standard iRepository of author entity of type GUID interface, so that all standard repository methods will also be available for the iAuthor repository. Find by name async is used in the author manager to query an author by name. GetListAsync will be used in the application layer to get a list of authors sorted and filtered to show on the UI. Both of these methods might seem unnecessary since the standard repository is already iQueryable and can be directly used instead of defining such custom methods. You're absolutely right, and you would use it like so in a real application. However, it is useful to learn how to create custom repository methods when you really need them when you're developing a real application. In this lesson, we implemented the domain layer of the authors functionality of the bookstore application. The main classes created and updated in this lesson were the author already exists exception, the author manager, the iAuthor repository, author consts, and the bookstore domain error methods, and of course, the en.json for English translations for our error codes. Join me in the next lesson where we will create the database integrations for our authors.